Good evening, New York City and my listeners around the world. I'm your host, Elizabeth Tripp. This is a live broadcast of Luminous Life. I'm so excited to be here. It's Wednesday evening, a little after 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You're tuning in on my live YouTube channel. You can check me out on bit.ly/Luminous Life podcast, as well as if you miss the live broadcast, you can always download Luminous Life on any major platform: iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, Stitcher. It's out there for the masses, which is so exciting because I love to bring this really special message to the global community. And, Luminous Life is just such a special show for me because it's really designed to shine a bright light on the deeper meaning of life. And we do that by really shifting your perspective around your life challenges, obstacles, and trepidations, and allow for you to bridge these experiences to your soul's lessons. Really, why you are here in this earth experience, in this time-space experience, and why it is that you're experiencing what you are, and what is available for you to learn and to expand upon within yourself as a result of these obstacles or challenges or pains that we experience. What can we evolve in this experience with ourselves? And the cool thing about this show is a couple things. And I love, number one, as a channel for spirit, I love to invite spirit into the podcast to be a channel for me. So I open myself up every podcast and set the intention that spirit, the universe, can really channel through me, use me as a conduit, as a source for wisdom for all of the listeners tuning in, so that you get exactly what you are needing, what your soul is needing on this show. And secondly, I love to bring on guests whom have a story, have their own personal journey they have been through, and can share their own insights on their life, their own challenges, their own obstacles that they've been through, and their own beginning of awakening to the real deeper meaning behind those experiences, what it caused for them, what kind of experiences they had that then really allowed for this bright light to be uncovered deep within, and for them to begin to shine luminously in their life. And today I have a really fantastic guest, and I've referred to her as a game changer because she's coming out with this new book, and she also has this incredible podcast. And she's really rising in the charts in the global community of the podcasting world and really making an impact. And so we're going to hear from this special guest tonight. Her name is Krista Xiomara, and we're going to welcome her on the show right now. So welcome, Krista. How are you?
Elizabeth, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I greatly appreciate the invitation.
Oh, you are so welcome. I'm just going to tell the guest a little bit about you. So you're a writer, a blogger, you're obviously a podcast host, like I mentioned, a poet, and also an author. And by the way, she joins us from Austin, Texas. How is it down there? How's it going in Austin, Texas?
Well, right now it's very hot and very dry. So we've
Well,
had some heat, but besides that, it's absolutely beautiful here.
oh, that's great. Well, in New York today, it's raining, so lucky you for the dry weather. But I hear that you live down in Austin, Texas, with your beautiful little dog, or is it a big dog? I'm not sure. Penny Moon, right?
Yeah, she's a little medium-sized Australian cattle dog, and she's just the sweetest little soul that I get the pleasure of being her companion.
Oh, that's beautiful. And you know what, guys? The reason why I was so attracted to Krista is because she has this beautiful way about her. She has a spiritual essence of her. And Krista actually shared with us that she practices spirituality through the lens of Buddhism, and she's really committed to rising the greater collective consciousness of the world through her podcast. And really, the podcast is such a beautiful platform for her to be able to bring on guests who have their own stories, their own, challenges and things, their own, path of awakening, as we call it, because her podcast is called Now I'm Awake. Now what? Right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That is
It's like,
so
what do you
cool.
do after you wake up?
Oh, right? What do you do after you wake up? What is life like? So, we're going to definitely be talking to you about that. But you're also a writer, and you have, speaking engagements that you have lined up. So, you're doing big things around the world and reaching a lot of people, which is so cool. And the other thing we're going to touch on is your new book, The Alchemy of Kindness. So, you are an amazing young woman. So
Oh,
excited to have you.
thank you so much. That's quite the introduction. I greatly appreciate that. I'm very excited to tell people a little bit more about what I'm doing and hopefully add, like I said, to the greater collective to raise some consciousness around the world is I think what I've been put on this earth to do. So
Yeah.
talk to you about all of that.
So, Krista, I am so curious about your story. I'm always fascinated to talk to people who have, something that has impacted them in a big way, that's transformed them in some way. So I know my listeners are super curious about where you grew up, what, your home life was like, or life as, a child or adolescence or into your 20s. Tell us about it. How did you get here today? And don't leave out any details.
Okay, I'll try not to leave out too many details. So, my story started in Carlsbad, New Mexico. I was born to a woman named Mary Navarrete. I was one of 8 children, and I was given up for adoption when I was really small. And I
Mm.
lived in orphanages and foster care until I was the age of 5 years old. And then I was adopted into a family with one of my biological siblings in El Paso, Texas, which is about 9 hours from here. She was 6, my biological sibling, and I was 5, and we got adopted into this family. And that's really when my life took, obviously a very major change. The family that I got adopted into um, practiced Catholicism, but in kind of an offshoot sect. I
Mm-hmm.
often reference this a lot in my own podcast because it wasn't the quite same experience that you get with normal Catholic just going to church every Sunday or maybe even just Christmas or Easter. I like to always say that my Catholic experience was like a mixture of like Woodstock because the priest was very hippie and like wanted to live off the land, and very Spartan, so it was like not materialistic. Uh, we didn't eat meat. I mean,
Mm.
I didn't grow up eating very many animals, and so I've kind of stayed that way as an adult. And then, but there were some really negative things about that experience that really shifted me to where I'm at on my path now.
Yeah.
There's always religious trauma, I think, or not always religious trauma. I think there's at times can be religious trauma in organized religion.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have to be, I guess, as open as you can to when you're going into any organized religion to try to have like your own firm understanding of things. But when you're young, you don't, right? I was
Absolutely. Yeah. You don't know. You just have to follow what mom and dad say.
right, yeah, and we were just dragged along for a lot of things. And I had a lot of experiences as a child that really um, changed who I was as a person. And then at the end of my 20s, I started questioning life, and I felt like sort of what if I was still Catholic, they would call like an internal rebellion, but it wasn't an internal rebellion. I think it was just the natural progression of thinking for yourself. I
Yeah.
hadn't been able to think for myself. So I
So
was told, go ahead.
meaning that, like, while growing up, you were kind of, and maybe you were going into this, like, said that this is the way life is, and this is the only way you can look at it, and this is the only way that you can see, people, the lens that you can see people through, and maybe it was a very rigid viewpoint of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was very black and white. It was very judgmental. It was very isolating. The way we grew up was that it was like us against everybody else. And parts of
Mm.
my family is very much still like that and have subsequently exiled me from their lives because they don't understand what it means to be outside of the church, right? And that's their prerogative.
Wow.
Um, but yeah, it was absolutely rigid, completely black and white. You couldn't question anything, and um, I'm such a curious person, and I would say from the time I was like 7 until I was about 26, 27, that's when I was like, I can't hold any of these questions into my mind anymore. I
Yeah.
I want to know. I can't just be a sleepwalker and just follow along. I know that's I don't think that's what God wants for us.
Right. So you still have kept a spirituality in a sense that you believe in something bigger than yourself, and you might call that God, but you're saying that you had just sort of this pull to kind of look at what you had been told, what you had been, sort of force fed to believe, and say, is this my truth? And do I want to stand in that belief my whole life? Is that what you're really saying here?
Yeah, yeah, that's sorry, I lost you for a second here. Um, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, you can still see me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sorry about that. I don't know, it got small for a second. Yeah, so for me it was about that. That's absolutely an accurate description of what was happening for me. And when I decided to leave the Catholic Church, I did go on my own spiritual like expedition of was what I like to call it. And so I started at a yogic ashram in Spokane, Washington, and I mean, just like lucky for me that ashram was there because it really set me on this path that I am now.
Yeah.
Um, and I learned about Hinduism, which then led me to, or I learned about yoga, which led me to Hinduism, which then I read the Tao, I read all of Rumi's works, I read the Quran. I went atheist for a hot minute just because I had to know. I really had to test that question that you were saying, like, is this my truth? I really needed to know what did I believe if I'm not a part of this church or a part of this family anymore, and how do I stand on my own 2 feet in the truth that I feel like there's a connecting source and there is a God out there. um, I sometimes think God is even still such a small word to describe what it is that created all of us.
Yeah.
I'm still working through that. But yeah, so it was like, how do I find my own truth? And I just went on an expedition for like 2 or 3 years, and I landed in Buddhism as a life practice. But most Buddhists do not believe in God, but I still believe in a God.
Yeah.
Um, and I still pray and I meditate, and it's kind of like an amalgamation of both of those things.
That is so incredible. And even to kind of hone in on the piece that you're saying that, your family just basically said you're not a part of this anymore because you want to break away and have a different truth there. So that must have been pretty difficult for you.
Yeah, I mean, my parents didn't talk to me for a good year and a half after I left. And one detail I did leave out is I did get divorced at the same time. So that didn't help the situation. They were really hurt by that. They're still very hurt by that. And so, yeah, it was, you know, their, it's their truth. And that's what I've come to learn. You know,
Mm.
it's their truth. They're very concerned about the state of my soul. I'm not, but they are, because that's the lens in which they operate, and that's okay. And I understand what it means to be afraid and to fear for your child. I get that on a basic level. I understand that they love me in their own way and that they may never understand this part of my life, and that's okay. Like I've just come to a lot of peace about it, if that makes sense.
No, that's beautiful. Beautiful. So, how did that? So, you went through this exploration, you studied all these different kinds of philosophies and religions and spiritual practices. And then, what drove you, or what were like the next steps to begin speaking? Because I imagine like sharing your voice or your opinions might have been scary with if you
Oh,
had
yeah.
had that background, you know?
Well, yeah, I think in hindsight, obviously I have so much clarity now. In hindsight, I wanted to share my truth with all of the people who didn't want to hear my truth.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Kind of like, hey, let me tell you for a second.
Yeah, because I think, as you know, and as we discussed in our preliminary call when we first met each other, is that there's something so beautiful about waking up and
Yeah.
owning your truth that you're like, I felt like honestly like the sound of music. Like all I wanted to do was like run around the world and just tell everyone how beautiful life is when you get to live in the present moment and you're not a victim anymore and you have agency over everything. It was like so liberating. Wanted to tell everybody, but not everyone in my circle wanted to listen.
Absolutely. They were kind of like, "Wow, what happened to you?" or like, "What's going on?" I would imagine, right?
Yeah, they were like, "So wait, you're not reading the Bible anymore?" I'm like, no.
Yeah. No, that's incredible. And for you to feel like you had that push to want to actually share your voice and really start, speaking a truth that felt really, connected to you is so brave. I mean, it's really a brave thing to do.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I think that at the time I felt it felt more stupid than brave because I was like kept bumping up against the wall of their resistance to my own change, and I kept feeling like I was getting rejected. And so the way, to fast forward where we are now and having this conversation is essentially I had to form a new family, a new ecosystem, a new support system around me that supported me as an adult living this lifestyle and living my own truth and finding people like you and also helping people who are at the beginning of their journey and they're lost as well and their family might have rejected them and saying like come here, have rest,
Mhm.
um, find some community here and know that like you're not alone. It was really important for me to use my voice and my experience in that way, and that's how I ended up, fast forwarding to where we are now, starting this podcast because I didn't want people to feel alone because I felt really alone.
Yeah, that's very incredible. Would you say that you're, when in, sort of looking at your attraction to Buddhism, would you say that that helped you kind of open up your inner self, your inner guidance system, your intuition to maybe trust certain people or, really connect with certain people that you now call your support system or who are in your ecosystem right now?
I think that it was trial and error in the beginning for sure, because I got, like I said, it was bumping up against the wall and getting rejected a lot. I think what Buddhism taught me, which it's still teaching me every single day, is that it's really grounded in tolerance and acceptance.
Mhm.
And so I had to first really find really deep and unconditional love and acceptance and tolerance for myself.
Yeah.
And I had to then extend that tolerance out to other people who were not tolerant of me or my ideas, which
Yeah.
included my family and some of my friends.
So you
And
really unconditionally are loving them in many ways, just accepting them for who they are, right?
right, and Buddha, he didn't say it this way, but it's I think the most uh, modern way to say it, but learning that you have to accept people where they are. And
Mhm.
that's been an overarching and repetitive lesson that I continue to learn and continue to, create more space and more compassion around that because I do still get frustrated and I want everybody, I'm a super big optimist and happy person. I just want everybody to love and accept each other. But I recognize that we have boundaries and there are differences, and we're all on the spectrum of waking up. I
Mhm.
definitely understand that. And I know that it's going to take everybody's own personal life journey to wake up in their own way and I just have to be there to support them in any way I can.
Beautifully said. Can I ask you, what does it mean to you to be, awoke or to wake up? It's a fascinating statement,
Yeah.
and it's the name of your podcast. I'm awake now. What? So, what does that really mean to you? What does that statement imply for you?
Well, um, I think for me it's two things. So, first of all, I don't like when people say woke because it's in the past tense. And I think
Mm,
that awakening, waking up, it literally implies that it's an ongoing process.
mm,
And sometimes I think, I don't know what your experience is, but in the spiritual world, it can feel like there's a finality or that there's a destination. Like you're going through all of these things and you're creating a lot of internal self-awareness and growth, and you're going to get somewhere, but it's actually the rest of our lives, and
mm-hmm.
it's supposed to be that way because our life experience, whether it's spiritual or not, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And
Exactly.
yeah, so it was important for me to say, to just have that just like as the starting line of a race, right? Like the podcast is like you're at the starting line and you're about to head out on your race, right?
I love that.
And and staying awake through it is necessary.
Yeah, and it almost implies like being in the present moment, really allowing yourself to be in your experience rather than setting conditions, when I get through this, then, or because I got through this now. It's just,
Yeah.
it really beautifully actually ties or anchors into kind of that present moment, really let yourself be here now concept. I love that. So when did
Yeah.
you start your podcast then? So when did the pouring of the truth come out and you start connecting with all these really cool people that you have on as guests?
Yeah, I'm so lucky. My podcast has had just more tremendous success than I could have ever put on it. I just put it out there and just hoped that somebody who needed some help might hear it.
Yeah.
I did start it 2 years ago, but started talking to my own truth, a few years before that, and trying to meet people and figuring out how do I continue this? Because like I have to have these kinds of conversations in order to continue to nourish my soul and nourish my own awakening because I can't grow any more than I can learn from other people. So the points when we get stuck in our own evolution is if we're not inviting other people in to show us what they know and what their experiences are. And so having a podcast, it allows me selfishly to have those conversations with people who are like literally all over the spectrum of awakening.
Yeah.
And I get to learn from them. And it's like it's the best, most selfish slash self or or giving thing that I could do. I'm so grateful I get to do it.
I love that, and it's beautiful because it shows me that you have this older soul energy around you because it really speaks to the volume of wanting to learn and wanting to understand and wanting to get to the bottom of things, or really listen to other people's journeys and self-reflect. That's such an amazing quality, and so I can imagine the success of the podcast has been just because of your openness and curiosity to be that way.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I've had such positive feedback from people, and I've had such interesting guests on there. Like I know you've had on your podcast too, that have just come from such different walks of lives, and a lot of them are, struggling with religious trauma. And it's interesting for the people who are on a spiritual path and started out in organized religion. We kind of all had the same trajectory. Like we rejected everything out of our old religion and
Mm-hmm.
got crazy and like went all nuts or whatever, like whatever our version of nuts is.
Yeah.
um, and then we came back to center, and I think that that's a common theme for a lot of people who feel wronged by whatever religion of origin they grew up in, which I know I did too for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
But then having studied all of the religions and ideologies that I did, I just learned we're all saying the same thing.
Yes.
And if I wish that we could connect as a larger global society on the commonalities we have instead of the differences, because we could move this world so much more further into such a beautiful space, but we're
We'll,
not there yet.
we'll get there. We'll get there because
Yeah,
it's great to have the conversation that spirituality is really a connection to whatever you want to call this source. You can call it God. You can call it the creator. You can call it the universe. You can call it the infinite, you know, um, force out there, and that by just having that openness to that and being able to share that message, it unifies everybody, right? Even if they're Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Buddhism or anything else that people can identify with themselves. So yeah,
yeah.
I love that, Krista. And so you've been doing this for 2 years, and you've had tons of different guests that, you have quite a big following, a lot of great reviews on your podcast. So you had told me about, and you had shared with me that you started writing a book, actually. And I want to hear a little bit about your book. Is it out or is it coming out? What's the scoop on this?
So the scoop is that it'll be coming out at the end of this year.
Ah, perfect.
Shooting, yeah, so we're shooting for Christmas time to get the book out. I'm working with an amazing editor by the name of Aisha Hilton out of Australia. So she's been helping me along the whole writing process because I've never written a full book. I've written poetry books before, and I have my own blog and things like that, but this will be like my first really big book.
Wow,
Um,
congratulations. It must be a process.
it's a process for sure. It's been really cool and interesting experience to have. I will say that because I think like anything you go into it thinking like I want the book to be about this, and it's like being a potter with clay. You start molding and you start shaping, and then you're like I want to make a tea kettle, and then you're like actually no, this is like a carafe or something. um I like analogies
Yeah, I love
because
that.
I'm a visual person.
Yeah.
So that's what's been interesting for my own experience writing this book is it started as something, and it's the core of what it is hasn't changed, but the messaging and the structure of the book has changed, and I've been really excited to watch that happen in real time as I write.
I love that. And it's called The Alchemy of Kindness. So I love the word alchemy. I'm going to give you, your chance to describe it, but it's a beautiful word to use, and really so beautiful to pair it with such a lovely word like kindness. So tell me about that. What is the alchemy of kindness really about?
So, okay, well, yeah, let me explain about alchemy and kindness, and then I'll get into the book. Is that for me, I feel like I'm an alchemist in the sense that once I learned that I could use all of my own experiences for growth, and that you could literally turn in the most like shitty experience or the most mundane experience into something that livens you and awakens you and keeps you centered, then like it's a game changer, and the rest of your life is going to be different. So for me, alchemy is how I live my life. I wake up and I'm asking myself, what is the universe asking of me today?
Oh, I love that. That is so strong. I love it. Love it, love it, love it.
Right. And then like what is each experience I'm having, whether it's at work or with my family or my friends, like all the things that give me discomfort, like what is it trying to teach me? How can I use this to change, to grow and evolve? And so
Oh,
for me,
perfect.
yeah, so for me, alchemy is like a critical component of who I am as a person and how I live my life. And so the book, The Alchemy of Kindness, is about using kindness to transform your negative self dialogue. So, as a Buddhist, compassion and tolerance and acceptance is like everything you hear for the rest of your life if you read anything
Right,
Buddhist.
right, right, right.
I
Yes.
mean, it's like beat into you. And
Mm-hmm.
I love it because I needed it. It's exactly what I needed for my own internal healing.
Yep.
And growing up Catholic, there was a lot of judgment because there was that otherness that we talked about at the
Yep.
beginning of the podcast. It's like us and them.
Yep.
And so I had to unlearn how to stop treating everyone around me like separate from me,
Mm-hmm.
myself.
Yeah.
because I was constantly judging myself, I was constantly criticizing myself, I was constantly not giving myself the benefit of the doubt or even believing in my own inherent goodness.
Yeah, probably a lot of fear in there, at the base of everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when I started studying Buddhism and I was learning the tenets of Buddhism around compassion and kindness and tolerance, I started applying all of those things to myself. And that changed my relationship with myself. And I also learned that, we have parts of our mind that are constantly trying to sabotage us, like the ego and the inner critic. So the book is about how to make peace with your inner critic and your ego in a way that allows you to love yourself unconditionally, because for me, self-hatred is such an epidemic in our culture right now. I mean, you can't look at anything on social media and not see people who are like, love yourself, and like, I used to hate myself, and but why are we like that? What's
Mhm.
happening
Mhm.
internally for us? And I think I answered that question. And so, like the podcast, I feel a responsibility and an obligation to teach other people how to liberate themselves from their own negative dialogue.
Beautiful. That's so well said. And I want to ask you, do you have a mentor or a coach or a guide that you work with that has helped you see this inner critic? Or, in my practice, I call this the little me and their kind of, loud role in sabotaging ourselves. Like, how did you come to discover this? Because it must not have been just through reading and some of the practices. Did you work with someone on this?
So I definitely have read a lot of psychology books. So I'll preface that with that too. I also understood at the beginning of my journey that part of my own awakening also was tied to my own ability to see myself clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think you can do that without psychology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's just my opinion. But so I definitely I've had two therapists that have really helped me grow as an individual. One when I was living near the yogic ashram, and then one here in Austin, Texas. And they both brought two different things to my ability to understand the internal negative dialogue.
Mm.
So one of them really helped me focus on like the ego and like what the ego was always saying about my situation. The other one focused on the inner critic and really helped me. I don't know if you're familiar with Richard Schwartz.
Mm-hmm. I've heard of him.
Yeah, so he's the father of internal family systems, and he basically coined this idea that we have like all of these parts within us that sometimes, are at war or sort of like, nitpicking at each other. That movie, that children's movie, In and Out, where they have the four characters: joy, happiness, disgust, and fear, that was literally written off the idea of internal family systems. Within that internal family system is your inner critic. And so, really honing down and understanding these different parts of us that make us these complex creatures and have us turn against ourselves at time, with them, plus all the reading I did, plus becoming a Buddhist. I mean, it didn't happen overnight. It's been a journey.
Beautiful. And it sounds like one that, has been just an experience in itself. And I really love the way you're describing it. So that's so cool. Is there like any workbook component to your book, or like self exercises or anything like that that the reader does? Like, how do you involve the reader in this?
Yeah, so the book is basically three parts. So it's getting set up. So I preface the first part with like a story about, you know, my own self-hatred and identifying that I needed to break. I was either going to commit suicide or I was going to find a way to live with myself, was
Mm.
kind of where the juncture at,
Wow.
was like my rock bottom. I was
Wow.
like, I either need to leave this place because I can't stand myself,
Mm.
I need to figure this out. And so that's the first part of the book. The second part of the book is going through all of the psychological and familial and conditioning that we have that creates our inner critics. And then the last piece, to answer your question, is guiding the reader through some exercises so that they can start on the path. and also just start modifying their language to themselves, which is like so critical.
How you
Um,
talk to the universe, right? It's so
right?
important.
Yeah, yeah. And if we, and I think what I learned on my journey too, and what I want to really hit home in the book is that there are subtle ways in which we degrade ourselves and we don't even think about it. Like if you tell yourself like I'm so stupid under your breath, or if you say like, oh, I'll never have somebody, or no one will ever love me, and you're just saying it in these split second
Yep.
moments, and it's so routine you don't even know you're doing it, but those build on each other and those create a wedge between our ability to love ourselves, which it means that we can't let people love us in return.
Oh,
And so,
so powerful. Yeah.
yeah, trying to help people move through that so that they can experience unconditional self-love and receive love in a way that is makes sense to them.
Oh, wow. What a beautiful book. So this comes out at the end of the year, so it'll be the end of 2019. So anyone who's looking for like those Christmas gifts, right?
Yeah.
Or New Year's gifts, or something that you can give a loved one around that time, they'll be able to find it on like Amazon or up on your website. How can people contact you, get a hold of you, or find you, Krista?
Yes, of course they can definitely. It will be on Amazon. Like it's so wonderful that we have like print on demand now, and that anyone can publish a book these days.
Yeah.
And then I do have my podcast website. I didn't want to do a whole other website just for my book. So the website for the podcast is ianwpodcast.com, and I'll have links for the book there. And I'll definitely be shouting out like pre-sale orders if anybody wants to order before they actually go on sale, and signed copies and things like that for
Oh,
anyone who's interested
beautiful.
in picking up the book.
Yeah, and I imagine it's for someone who definitely is in the space where they're looking to, self explore, really look at that inner conversation, really see themselves in a different way and gain a new perspective, which is so beautiful because the world needs people like you. And I'm just am so impressed by the way you articulate your knowledge of the self, and really seeing such a beautiful journey unfolding for you. It's amazing. um, yeah, I want to ask you really quick about before we wrap up here, what are like a couple of words of advice that you want to share with listeners out there? Maybe someone who's going through a hard time, maybe who someone has a really strong inner critic. What would be your personal advice for them, and how would you offer them some kindness or peace of mind in their journey?
Yeah. So I open my book with the the affirming idea that we come into this world alone and we leave it alone, and that's not a morbid thought. It's just a fact that I want to call attention to the reader and to anyone listening that we have the entirety of our lives to be with ourselves. And so it's important that we cultivate a meaningful, kind, compassionate, tolerant, loving relationship with ourselves. And that it cannot wait. It cannot wait until you're 80. It cannot wait until you're 90. It has to happen today if you're 16 years old, or if you're 40, or if you're 62, because what we are seeing in the world at this moment in time, especially in our country, are people who haven't spent time loving themselves, and they're attacking other people for no reason at all.
Yeah.
So, so the way we love ourselves, the way we love the world around us is by loving ourselves, and it's critical that it's not just something that's lighty to say, or something that's like, up in the clouds to say, oh, I should really love myself. It's a true act of courage and bravery to say, I'm going to love myself no matter what, no matter my mistakes, no matter how many times I've been married or divorced, no matter how many times I've been fired from a job, no matter how many times my friends have left me, like whatever ups and downs you've had, you have to love yourself through every single one of those and know that you're inherently worthy, good, and lovable, and worthy of what life has to bring you, and even just the basic gifts of air in your lungs and sight to see and food in your belly, and that's enough.
Wow. Really, really beautiful. So, so, so beautiful. What an amazing soul you are, and just so much you bring to the table, and such a really fantastic conversation. I loved hearing your story. What a wonderful, expression of how to ignite that light within and really shine so luminously for the world to see you. So, thank you so much for being on today's podcast.
Thank you for having me, Elizabeth. I'm so grateful that we were able to connect, and I'm really glad that we got to have this conversation. And thank you for holding space for me. I greatly appreciate it.
Ah, you're so welcome. You're so welcome. So I appreciate it, Krista. And everybody out there knows how to get a hold of you. I will repost your social media handles and give them the info when we upload this video and out onto the podcast. I want to give you a big hug and a nice shout out to you. Thank you so much. And we will cross collaborate soon. We'll be in touch, okay?
Okay, thanks so much.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. This is Elizabeth Tripp signing out. Love and light.